Welcome back to our channel. Thank you so much for watching. Today we're going to be talking to Danny. Danny's story is just, it's so touching. Danny is coming to us from Canada, and I am sure many of you are going to resonate with him. So let's go. Before we begin, I want to thank you so much for liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel. If listening to me psychologically debrief and overshare on social media is your jam, be sure to follow me on Instagram and TikTok, where we have interesting conversations in the comments. And I want to thank you so much because it just shows that people actually are getting on board with the fact that there is healthiness and joy on the other side of high control religion. And on this channel, we talk about positivity. And I woke up, now what? That's what we tend to focus on. And so if you've been on the channel, thank you so much. Your stories mean so much because in our stories, we find each other. Thank you so much for coming on our show. It's an honor to have you. Why don't you take us back to the beginning and tell us why you're here?
I was born into the religion, I guess, like most people. On my mom's side, my grandparents were in the religion as well as my parents. And then on my dad's side, it was just, I think one of his sisters was also in the religion and the rest of his family wasn't. Growing up, I was really close with my parents and my grandparents. And when I was around 19 years old, my brother was disfellowshipped. And for me, this probably sounds really bad, but it was really easy for me to shun my brother because when we were growing up, we didn't get along. Like we would fight constantly, and like he would be in fights with my parents, and like I was the more mellow one, my brother was the emotional one. And so like we definitely clashed. And so when my brother was disfellowshipped, it was like, okay, like I don't have to talk to him anymore. This is great. But for my parents, I know it was definitely very hard for my parents. And my dad was an elder, so he knew the rules about that family can't be disfellowshipped for contact with disfellowshipped family members. So my parents still, to this day, they maintain a limited relationship with my brother.
So he's still disfellowshipped?
He's still disfellowshipped, yeah. And I actually don't know what he believes in the present. It would be nice to properly reconnect with him, but I have to deal with my parents first, and then, brother can come after that.
So did that send the message to you that whether you get disfellowshipped or disassociated, which currently you're neither, what it would look like for you with your relationship with your parents?
Yeah, so I feel like there's definitely a possibility that my parents won't completely shun me. However, my reasons for leaving are more ideological versus having committed a serious sin, even though like by JW standards, I've obviously committed many serious sins by now. But that wouldn't be the reason for me leaving the religion, So my leaving being ideologically driven, my parents might treat it very differently. I really just don't know.
Sometimes my brother was disfellowshipped for 25 years, and I actively participated in that shunning. And in the relationship, we're still working on, but that's a whole lifetime lost. But while he was disfellowshipped, I remember hearing my mother talk about it as she never lost hope for him. Because even though, we knew full well he was never coming back, at the time of him being disfellowshipped, it wasn't an ideological difference. He was just smoking pot with some elder sons, so they didn't lose hope. Do you think that an ideological difference and no longer believing in it is more serious?
For my parents,
yeah,
for my parents, I think it is more serious. Again, I can't possibly know how they would react exactly. I do know that they still hold out hope that my brother will come back one day. So, that's another reason for sure that they maintain a limited contact with him, is that they're hoping that he'll come back. But if I confront them with the reality that I'm never coming back, that could be different. I don't think my brother has ever done that with them. But I don't actually really know, because like we do like talk every once in a while, and I've been to his place, and he's married now and has a wife, and so like he's no longer sinning, so my parents are happy about that.
Of course. You mentioned something in pre-production that was very significant, especially for a lot of people in our audience, talking about having older parents who have believed it their whole life. And there's this internal struggle of whether or not to tell them or to just let them live their life out fully believing it. Can you speak more about that?
Yeah, like I definitely like for my grandparents, I'm glad that they were able to live out their full lives as believers. And, at least from my point of view, like I think they had good, happy lives. And, I want that for my parents too. And like coming to the realization that the beliefs you've held for 50 plus years are not true, that's devastating. And at that older age, I can't possibly imagine what that would be like to know that you've
Wow.
only got, a fraction of your life left, and everything in the past has been tainted with this lie.
And they don't think that this life is all there is. So it's an internal struggle. Do I tell them that
Yeah,
it's all a lie, or do I let them just? But what that does for a lot of people in the audience is it makes them feel they need to stay for the sake of their aging parents. I can't tell you how many people are feeling that way, especially in our 30s and 40s and upward of our older parents. What do we do? They have no retirement, they have nothing. Some are taking care of their parents and their parents rely on them, and they still feel this, they're in this blissful new system mentality. They live their
yeah,
whole life waiting for some eventual life. It is pretty hard to decide.
yeah. And more on that topic, like my parents, I think, are fairly stable as far as their future with retirement and everything. Like my dad and mom are both retired now, and I feel like financially they'll be secure for the rest of their lives. But there is going to come a point where they're going to need help. I know that they don't plan on downsizing their house. They plan on like living out their lives in their house, which
Right.
I think would be great like as long as that's possible. But like depending on how they shun me or not, or don't shun me, that can have a serious effect on their well-being in their later years. Because my mom went to the effort of like taking care of my grandparents full time, and I think it was really good for them because they were both able to live out their last years in their own house, you know with all the memories that come with that house. And especially it probably would have been so good for my grandmother because she had Alzheimer's in her later years. So I can't even imagine like if she had been put in a home, like that would be devastating. Like to wake up and not know where you are. Because
And
like
it's a massive amount of pressure that you have on you because your brother is already disfellowshipped.
yeah.
So in their minds,
And
they may not see him in the new system.
I know that my brother is not going to be in a position where he's going to be able to take care of my parents later in life. Um, you know, not to say anything negative about my brother, but I feel like if it ever comes down to one of us taking care of them, it's going to be me. So that adds another layer of complication to the relationship, for
Right,
sure.
because if they're a believing JW, they've already kind of written off a disfellowship person to not be in the new system. And so now it's all on you. And
Yeah, actually, that's very true because
mhm,
I'm the one who's not disfellowshipped. I'm the one who's not disassociated. And so like I'm I'm their hope, for seeing a child in paradise. I had like, I would say, like a pretty happy childhood. I was homeschooled from kindergarten to grade 2, and then also grades 4 and 5. It was actually probably different from a lot of people. I actually wanted to be homeschooled, but my parents actually pushed me into public school, which looking back was definitely a good thing. And that was like my first exposure to the so-called worldly people. I could see that these people weren't as bad as, what people would say in the meetings would have you believe. And through my years in public school, there was definitely a disconnect starting between my indoctrinated beliefs and what I could see in the real world. It was around like grade 7 and 8, I started to have school friends, and grade 7 was also when I like really started doing well in school, and I ended up with a lot of praise from that. And so that felt good, but at the same time, it was also like, this is glory for Jehovah, not for yourself, you know? My parents, when I was younger, I was probably the one who wanted to get baptized when I was younger, but they're saying you're not old enough to make that decision. But then it flipped when I was like around 16, 17, 18. I started feeling a lot of pressure, not just from my parents, but from other people in the congregation to get baptized. At 18, I finally gave in, either just before I turned 16 or around 16 when I actually discovered that I was gay. And it was not easy to deal with those feelings. And I kept them to myself for an incredibly long time. I was always kind of a computer nerd, so I like was doing research online, and I was seeing that, you know, in the literature, there isn't really a lot said about homosexuality. It's kind of kept to a minimum in the witness literature, and they indicate that you can grow out of it. That was always a little bit of a hope for me, but at the same time, I went on the internet and I did the research, and I knew that everyone in the world is saying that this can't be changed. You know, I kind of accepted the reality that maybe I just have to stay single for my whole life, and then in the paradise I'll be perfect. And I think that's a lot of gay witnesses do when they're growing up, is they just kind of, okay, like there's nothing else I can do. I think there's a fairly recent video of Stephen Lett saying that that's apparently not true, that you're going to be perfect in the paradise because you're still going to have those feelings apparently.
This must have been massive for you. Massive.
Yeah, and I mean, like it it's kind of funny because it took me so long to figure it out. 16, I'm the end of my puberty. And when I look back, there were definitely signs earlier, way earlier than that. But I just, like, I had no idea. I wasn't educated on what those kinds of things meant. And if children were exhibiting those kinds of behaviors, it was just kind of like you didn't talk about it, you know?
Ever. You never talked about
Ever.
any form of sexual health.
And so, like, also,
Ever.
like, becomes a disconnect from your parents, definitely, if there's something so huge in your life that you know you can't really talk about. Yeah. So it was also around when I was 16, I started developing a really close friendship with an older gentleman who was in the congregation. We became really close. There was never never any possibility of anything sexual. We were just like hanging out all the time. He was funny. He was very serious about the truth, and elder and everything. And we got along great. And then one day, my mom talked to me about what kind of touching is wrong and stuff like that. And I knew that she was imagining things that were happening that weren't happening. And so I brought it up with my friend, and he went and told the elders. That situation kind of exploded. And yeah, I'm also like dealing with these feelings of discovering my sexuality at the same time. And one of my best friends is now being taken away from me because my parents were telling me you can't associate with him anymore. And he was removed as an elder, and he ended up moving congregations not long after that. And so that was extremely devastating to me because I didn't really have a lot of friends growing up. So that was another really difficult moment in my teens.
When you realized that you were gay, one of my best friends was on the channel a couple of months ago, and he went to Bethel, he pioneered, he became a ministerial servant. The way he worded it was he tried to tick off all the boxes to try and think that Jehovah would take it away from him, because he thought there was something wrong with him in that sense. And if it, like in the organization, they're not going to say this, but you can be gay, just don't act on it, which is probably why you said you'll just be single for the rest of your life.
Exactly,
which
yeah.
Is torture. Was it the same for you, where you felt, if I just do more, or I'm not enough, if I just tick off the boxes, or even the question of, if it's so bad, why am I made this way?
Yeah, so there was a little bit of that, but at the same time, I had like done the third-party research, so I knew that that was a long shot. That like maybe it's possible, but that's like a very, very remote possibility. So I didn't really dwell on that. I kind of just rather said to myself that, okay, I'm just not going to act on it ever, and that's just going to be the way it is. And yeah, so it was around that time that I lost one of my best friends. I was discovering my sexuality, and I kind of dropped into a deep depression at that time. I was definitely never suicidal, but like it was pretty bad. And then there was one day that I had a really bad day at school, and I basically said to myself, like, I'm never going back to school. I was like in such a deep depression. And that night, I got a really bad upset stomach. I was vomiting all night. And then in the morning, I was like, Mom, you have to take me to the hospital. Like, it's really bad. And it's funny because like I told myself I wasn't going to school, but I actually had like a really good reason this time. And I went to the hospital and I had my appendix taken out. I think it was either the same day or like, I think it was the same day. Yeah. So I don't know if it was related, but I can't imagine it wasn't related. Like all that stress and the depression, and it just culminated in this appendix attack basically. And so that was probably my lowest point. And then after that, I started recovering emotionally, and I got, back into my routine. And I did have like a lot of people visit me in the hospital, which is nice. Yeah, and not too long after that, I believe I was 18, I got baptized. And I was really hoping that baptism was gonna like really change my life and put me like set my path straight. And actually I remember being mortified of getting an erection going into the bathtub pool in front of all those people. But I didn't, but I was mortified that it would happen. I was so terrified.
Oh, you see, it just goes to show how innocent we are. The things we just don't know.
But yeah.
So hold on a second. So you agreed to get baptized. You made this resolve that you were going to remain single for the rest of your life, and you got baptized knowing that that was your decision.
Yeah.
Do you know how brave that is? Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have known it was brave at the time, but I guess looking back, I mean, when you're indoctrinated like that, like what other choice do you have?
Yeah, well, now you look at it, it's terrible and sad, but
it is sad. But and like a lot of other people are going through similar situations as well.
So many. And I see in the Reddit group how many people are struggling with having to decide between who they really are and keeping their family. And it's a tragedy. And I'm really glad you're on here to talk about this and set an example of how you can do it. And this is what you're part of this now. You're part of this community of people, and you're a voice for the people who are silenced.
I hope so. Baptism, after I got baptized, I knew it was a mistake because
Really?
like nothing changed. It was just the same, and then after that, it was mostly going through the motions. I auxiliary pioneered a couple times, when they had the special campaigns for the memorial and the conventions and stuff. But
when you say nothing changed, do you mean, for me, I remember people would say, oh, I felt the Holy Spirit, like they felt different, or they suddenly had like these epiphanies, almost like when Jesus got baptized, if this is something people believe in, I don't know, that his memory of the heavens just kind of was like, poof, by osmosis given to him in his head. Was it like that where you thought something within you would change, or what was it that you thought baptism would change for you?
I thought it would get easier to control my urges, that weren't allowed, that I wasn't allowed to have, and I thought it would make me want to be more serious about the religion. And I mean, for a time, like I definitely still took it seriously, and I was a believer into my early 20s for sure, like a full believer. But yeah, like it was a disappointment for me, and I knew right away, like this was a mistake. I did think at the time it wasn't necessarily that I should never have gotten baptized, but I knew that I wasn't ready when I did get baptized. I wasn't ready for it.
And there's consequences to baptism too, that,
Yes, exactly.
you know, now no
And
matter what you do, there's going to be some sort of public shaming or something, confessions
I
to the committee, things like that.
yeah, I mean, I didn't dwell too much on the consequences because I was, a good boy. I was nice, I was always polite, and also around that time, like whenever you would see like a homosexual in the media, in the mainstream media, it would always be the very effeminate kind of person who just wasn't really attractive to me. So it was also kind of like, if that's all that there is to offer from that life, then I'm not really interested anyway, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense.
So
Right.
I think that made it a lot easier to control that side of me. And also in high school, I didn't really experience bullying, but there wasn't really any gay role models to look up to, like in my personal life at least. The world that I saw out there for my gay side, I wasn't interested in it, basically.
I see. Makes sense.
So it
And then
made it
it
easy.
fit the JW narrative of where else are you going to go?
Yeah.
Right. So now you're baptized and you realized it was a mistake and you realized it didn't fix you, which is what it sounds like you were kind of hoping it would do.
Kind of hoping, but I knew it was a long shot. Yeah.
Yeah, but you still remain hopeful. It's not like you had expectations. You were just like, man, if baptism can fix someone, I want it to be me. That kind of mentality, right?
Yeah.
So then
much.
what happened? So you do auxiliary pioneering thereafter, and you were a full believer throughout your 20s. Like, talk us through this whole process of being kind of fractured in your
actually,
mind.
that's a good way of putting it. It's fractured. So after high school, I went to cooking school for a 9-month program, and after that, I started working at a restaurant. And if you've worked in restaurants, you know that there's a lot of rough people who work in kitchens. And I was definitely, like, looking back, I was so naive starting to work in that environment. I'm also appreciative because those experiences really opened up my eyes to what the outside world was really like, or like a glimpse of it, I guess. There was one of my coworkers there who I didn't like realize this at the time, but looking back, I can tell that he was trying to wake me up. And he was posing some really difficult questions to me. There's so many questions he posed to me, it's hard to remember them all, but just for an example.
You mean from being a witness? Did you announce you were a witness? Is that
well, everyone at work knew at that time that I was a witness because, I asked for my meeting nights off and stuff like that, as a proper witness does. And so everybody knew about the religious side of me at work, at least for the first few years or so. And one of my coworkers used to pose some really thought-provoking questions, and he was definitely doing research on apostate websites, but I had no idea, obviously.
Right.
And he would pose questions like, if God created everything on this earth, then why aren't Jehovah's Witnesses allowed to do drugs if God created them? And I would come up with an answer like, oh, like marijuana, you can make, the hemp is very useful and it comes from the same family of plant and stuff like that. You do the mental gymnastics and you always come up with an answer, even though like it's definitely not a satisfying one. And
definitely.
And also how the Bible genealogy of like the human race doesn't add up to the reality of the fossil record.
Right.
Like
yeah. Right. I love that. And then disproving the doctrine entirely. Were you raised around the 1914 doctrine? Because
the
youngins
I remember
nowadays
studying the Daniel book. I actually really loved the Daniel book.
Yeah, and the youngins nowadays are like 1914. What does that even mean? Because they don't really talk about it anymore. Don't know? Yes, they're just like, they don't get it. Listen, I was raised in that religion, and I still couldn't understand it. So I had a talk one time on the half a time discussion, and I checked out. But Yeah, a lot. Well, you know what? I've discovered that a lot of witnesses don't truly know the doctrine of the religion that they say they believe in because it's mostly indoctrination and emotional control. They think they know, but they really don't. Many of them. I don't want to say all, but many
Yeah.
don't actually.
Yeah, I definitely like I thought I understood the 1914 doctrine really well.
Mhm.
And I knew the reasoning fairly well and everything, and I never really questioned it. But now that I know the truth of that doctrine, it's like, how
Mhm.
did I not see that? It's just so
Right.
obvious.
We all say that.
It's
How
just
did
like
I
completely made up out of thin air.
how did there are I talk to people every single day, and when things come back into my memory, how did I how did I not see that? Because you don't see what you're not looking for. And that's just a
Yeah.
fact, So now you're working in a restaurant, continue.
So yeah, I started to over time, over it definitely took a few years, but I started to develop some meaningful friendships with some of my coworkers.
Hmm.
And I started getting into a hobby that I got into mostly just like to hang out with my coworkers. I started modifying cars. So that became like a huge hobby for me. Through the hobby mostly, I kind of started being less and less active in the religion. I didn't even like think about this at the time. I was talking to one of my former roommates a couple months ago, and he said that he like started distancing himself from me because I wasn't like regular at the meetings anymore. I wasn't like regular in field service. And I didn't even think about it because like I was getting so much more involved in this second life with so-called worldly people that I just didn't really care about the fake witness friends I used to have.
Good
You know
for
what I
you.
mean?
Good for man, you were a lot
So,
further along than many of us were. I mean,
but
good for
still a
you.
believer at that time. I still believed, even though
Mhm,
like I was less active. I always,
mhm.
it's so ridiculous, but I had always had this thought in the back of my mind, if the world's really going to end, then I'm going to notice the signs and I can get back in good graces because I'm still like watching for that.
That
It's
makes sense.
ridiculous because like if you tell that to like a believer, they're like, well, God's going to know that you were just wanting to
True.
do the thing and
And
it's
they
not going to
think it's
count.
coming all the time. Like they think everything is a sign of the times. Like it's the persecution porn. Everything means the sky is falling. So at any given moment, it's going to happen any minute.
And like I could also like start to see cracks in the doctrine looking back. Like I don't even know when the wake up process started because there's these doubts that creep in and you shove them to the back of your mind and you ignore them and you don't even realize necessarily that they're important, but they are. And like I can remember, I don't even know how old I was, but I remember sitting in the meeting and there was always this idea that it was always only voluntary contributions. No one has ever forced donate money to the religion. And then I don't remember when it started, but they started passing resolutions in the congregation. All the publishers are kind of like expected to contribute a certain amount, and that never sat well with me. And so I never actually followed through on my share of the resolution because like I couldn't justify like giving, like it didn't feel like I was giving freely. This should be a donation that I'm giving freely. I shouldn't be giving this donation because I'm being told that I'm supposed to, because like that goes against what they tell everyone else. So that was one of my early doubts. Actually, when I was young, I was probably like between 10 and 12. There was an incidence of CSA in the congregation where I grew up. I had always thought that it was handled well because I knew that the perpetrator was convicted and like it had been reported to the police, and obviously the perpetrator was disfellowshipped. And so like from a believer's point of view, like that's exactly how it should go basically. I think for most people that's how they think it should go. Like it should be reported to the police because it's a crime, and the person is removed from the congregation, and that's kind of it. And there was never like an actual announcement, but like the rumor mill worked its way through, and so like everybody kind of knew. I had no idea who the victim was, and it actually turned out to be the sister of one of my best friends. I had no idea. And I always wondered why his dad had never served as an elder, even though he was like doing all the right things.
Mm-hmm.
And looking back, I kind of wonder, like, maybe he was barred from serving because he reported the incidents to the police.
Makes sense.
Which I've heard has happened, you know, or like people have been removed for reporting. Never even crossed my mind, like back when I was a believer.
You don't think while you're in there, look, this is God's organization. They would never allow, like Let said, that's ridiculous. I mean, we all think that, you know, but yeah.
I mean, they kind of do, but it's the practice, not the teaching. It's the practice that's an issue. It's not what they teach on the issue, you know?
Right.
And
well, it's their doctrine and then it's their procedure.
Policy,
the procedure is who knew that there'd be a P&P in God's only organization, right? It's the handbook. And the thing is, shouldn't every member get a copy of the P&P? Wouldn't that make sense? Why is it so secretive? I never understood that. It's like they were guarding it like it was like the holy grail of information. It never sat well with me how secretive they were about that book. And then when I woke up, I got that book. And now I know why. Because if everybody knew what was really going on in that secret policy and procedures manual, they would probably reconsider everything that they were taught, which is basically what we've all done.
Well, they would start questioning it at the very least.
Yeah, definitely. So for you, it wasn't any one wake up moment. It was just a bunch of little things over time that kind of eroded away at your belief?
But no, it wasn't like a sudden moment. After I moved out when I was probably like 21 or 22. I moved to a bigger city, and in my new congregation, I started noticing things that I had never noticed in my original congregation. There was a lot more drinking in the new congregation. Like there would be congregation get-togethers and there would be elders who were obviously intoxicated. And I'd never in my life seen a witness obviously intoxicated before, like ever in my life. So that was quite a shock to see how the attitude toward alcohol was very, very different. And there was another incident where I had gone on a snowboarding trip with a couple of other brothers, and they were talking about gossip in the congregation about like people doing things that were disfellowshipping offenses. And then like a couple of months later, one of them was appointed as a ministerial servant and everything's fine. And it's like they shouldn't have been appointed as a ministerial servant knowing what I know. That's another crack. When it comes to like reconciling my sexuality with my beliefs, I always kind of had this idea of, you remember when they would talk in the congregations about the Apostle Paul having his thorn in the flesh? I always wondered, like, I wonder if the Apostle Paul was gay. That was something that I thought about, because it's like, it's something that they didn't talk about. Like, it's not talked about in the Bible what it was, but he never married as far as I'm aware. Yes. And I always thought to myself, like, I wonder if the Apostle Paul was gay.
You know, I never thought of that. Because it's true. They don't tell you what the thorn in the flesh is. You're just supposed to kind of apply it to yourself anyway, without
in any way that you can.
Yeah, anything's a thorn in the flesh. Anyone, that sister who's wearing too much perfume, she's a thorn in the flesh. But it's I never thought of that.
Well, I mean, I haven't really done any research on it. It was just kind of something I thought about when I was a believer and I was like 16, 17.
And even still, wouldn't God know that? And he became an apostle nonetheless.
Yeah, so I kind of looked at that as like, okay, maybe I can do this. You know, maybe someone in the Bible went through the same thing I'm going through and they got through it. So that means I can get through it too.
Wow.
If that makes sense.
It does. So even then you were looking for comfort
role models,
in the Bible.
You know, anything to make it easier, really.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
You do what you have to do. I also started around that time, you know, noticing, oh, like maybe so-and-so is gay, and maybe so-and-so is gay, and maybe so-and-so is a lesbian. And it's like, you're kind of like realizing that, oh, this world isn't so black and white anymore. There's other people going through similar struggles and just nobody's talking about it. There's people, I'm sure, back in those same congregations I was in who are still in and they're still dealing with the struggle. It's hard to think about like what they've done to contain themselves.
you ever find
against
out if any of
violence.
them were?
It turns out that one of my former roommates is gay, and we had no idea about each other when we were living together, and we only just like reconnected actually within the last year.
Wow, that must have been so reassuring for each
So,
other, so comforting.
and when I was doing research online about homosexuality, I also stumbled upon the Wikipedia page for Jehovah's Witnesses. So I actually read that when I was like around 16, and there were some things in that. I thought the article was like pretty objective and fair, but there were some things brought out in the article that I wasn't aware of. I believe the article mentioned the confusion about 607 BCE and how nobody else believes that date.
Nope.
And I think I did read some things about CSA as well, but at the same time, I had seen the case of CSA in my own congregation, and then I was like, okay, like those are just outlier cases. I know that it gets handled properly. At least, you know, that was my perception, even though like I know that that's definitely not true looking back.
We were all
But yeah,
kind of,
like the way I kind of did the mental gymnastics around the 607 date was I was like, okay, well, like God knew that they were going to interpret it this way, so that's why it's written down that way. That's such a bad argument because like obviously having the wrong date written down in the Bible or whatever would lead people to not believe. So why would God do that? Absolutely ridiculous. I was getting, I think, mentally exhausted with the meetings and field service and everything, you know, as one does, because it feels like a kind of torture to sit there and listen to the same things you've heard over and over and over again. You're commenting things that are written down, like the answers are already there for you. You just, you know, copy and paste from the watchtower to your mouth, and you know, and
you really think you're doing something there too. Like,
well, it feels good because like you want that recognition of like being active, but at the same time it's just like so mentally exhausting because like your brain is telling you that this is a waste of time because you already know this, and you know everyone else is saying like you have to be here to do this.
and you have like a thirst for knowledge at the same time. And even
Yeah,
though
I
I know
did have a
this,
thirst for knowledge.
I still want to learn something.
Yeah, so like the meetings were getting tiring. I was going less and less. I was going less and less in field service and just focusing on, you know, my friends and my hobby. And I don't really know exactly when it happened, but I started to think, okay, they've definitely got this wrong. They've definitely got this wrong. You know, like evolution definitely makes more sense than what they're saying. And then they kind of also like did a flip flop on evolution where they're like, oh, like actually like Noah's Ark didn't contain all of the species. They just kind of, you know, there was enough to like create all of the variety that we have today, which is like saying that there's evolution without actually saying that there's evolution. So that was another like
Yeah, I didn't know about that
I kind
either
of
until
figured
someone
like
came on
they
the
would,
channel and said it.
I kind of figured that they would have to eventually accept evolution fully, and they still haven't gotten there yet. But
Nope.
you know, if they're going to survive, they kind of have to go that direction anyway. Let's be honest. I had kind of accepted evolution, even though it went against official doctrine, but I was still like a partial believer because when you're indoctrinated like that, you still cling on to a few things that are okay. Oh, okay, like this is true, therefore everything else is true enough that it's still the religion I should be in.
True enough. Yes, I
It's
remember
true
thinking
enough.
that. Yeah, and
Because
I was
even they
very
will
much.
say like they don't have 100% of the truth, but you know, this is the best organization. Yeah, even as I distanced myself from the organization, and even as I lost my belief in the religion, I still was feeling like the organization was still positive. I didn't experience some of the directly negative things that a lot of people do, besides suppressing my sexuality, of course.
I mean, that's
At the time,
not,
it wasn't really that important to me because, like I said, I just wasn't interested in that life.
it's not a small thing. I mean, but
but it wasn't important to me, really, because I was just like, okay, I'm not really interested in that. Like, and
Okay.
like the
Yeah.
people I have a crush on at work, like they're straight, so like they're not interested in me, so it's never going to go anywhere. Surprisingly easy to keep that part of me quiet, and I think that's probably very different from a lot of other people, but for me, that's how it worked.
No,
And
and
so
I appreciate having a different perspective on it too.
I still felt like as I was becoming less and less active in the religion, their beliefs aren't true, but they're not hurting anyone. They seem to be happy, most of them. And it's kind of like just leave well enough alone. I was about 26. I was watching a TV show and I saw this app called Grinder portrayed on the TV show. And I was like, you know what? Like, what's stopping me from seeing what's out there? That was the moment really when I decided to start living my life for who I really am. And so I downloaded the app. I started talking to people. It took me some time, but I eventually started meeting people. I developed some really close friends. At that point, I had decided I was basically leaving the religion behind. And, I was still pretending with my parents. I didn't want to upset my parents. I didn't want to disturb that relationship. I kind of just wanted to put it on the back burner, while I went ahead and lived my life. Yeah, one of my friends that I met online, we ended up going to Europe together for 2 months. And that was like an amazing experience, really life-changing for sure. And I experienced love, I experienced heartbreak, and it was probably the only downside of that part of my life was having to go through that heartbreak with just one or two best friends to help me through it. I didn't have the support of my family. I didn't have the support of most of the people I'd grown up with. And so I kind of had to deal with that alone, which was really difficult. At the same time, it wasn't nearly as bad as when I was depressed in high school. At the end of the day, like I was learning things about myself that most people learn when they're going through puberty in high school. But for me, I was like 26 and experiencing this stuff.
And how did you reconcile that when you realized you learned things later in life that like you said, most learn in their teen years? Did it hit you all at once? Did you feel far behind? What was that like for you?
I look back on it pretty positively because in some ways it worked out better just because I was experiencing those things as a more mature adult than as a teenager. So, I could process things more objectively, even though it was extremely difficult. But I think if I was a teenager going through the same things and trying to keep it secret, it would have been like 10 times more difficult.
Which is what so many of
Which is
them are
what so many
dealing with
people go
right
through.
now. And you are just this calming voice of reason on this side of the organization. And this is why it's so wonderful to have you on here. Like your story is very fascinating to hear. And then you traveled through Europe, you fell in love, you got your heart broken, you did all the things. And it was a little around this time that you decided the religion is not a thing. But what was that like for you too, when you decided, oh, it's not the truth? And then you discovered, I can do what I want. I can love who I want. I can be who and how I want. What was that like for you?
It was really just, I had so many undescribable the amount of new experiences I had just in like the years from like 26 to 28. It was like I was starting a completely new life, and the world wasn't scary and it was exciting. And of course there was positives and negatives. That's like everything. I was just like wanting to be as open as possible to new experiences. I wanted to really live because I still had some of my 20s left. I wanted to make the most of it. I kind of had reconciled at that point, like I'm not going to live forever, so I have to live this life. I can't be waiting anymore. So I just went for it. Like when I went to Europe, I quit my job, left all my stuff with my parents. They didn't really know what was going on, but I kind of just like kept them in the dark for most of it. I actually didn't even tell them I was going to Europe until it was like a month in.
But that in and of itself is fun too, just leaving and not telling anybody.
And like my phone number was disconnected, so like nobody could get a hold of me. And like
even better. I love this. I love this mentality you have of, and I say this all the time, nothing is all good or all bad, but what you experienced is, I've spoken with a couple of people, and having no exposure to the gay community until I left, I cannot imagine what it is like for most of the people in the organization who are trapped, to literally be trapped in that organization. And here you are sending this amazingly positive message that, listen, you can live your life, like you can, and you will. And so it's just really refreshing to have you sending that message out.
It was flying by the seat of my pants. Like I literally had like $3,000 in the bank for my whole trip, and I was couch surfing. And yeah, it's funny because when you're in the organization, you're told like, oh, you can go anywhere in the world and you have a place to stay. Well, it turns out that's actually true for everyone. Like you can go find places to stay for free just about anywhere. And you don't have to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Like so-called worldly people, they're not so they do have empathy, they do have fellow feeling, they do want to help other people. Like this is not something that's unique to Jehovah's Witnesses. So that was very eye-opening for me as well.
Because they think that we thought we were, right? We thought we were the only people
Yeah.
who, but it actually wasn't the case. It was only just each other. It was only just the organization itself. Like we didn't help the homeless. We didn't do soup kitchens. We didn't go work with charities. We didn't do anything with other communities that were not our own. So really, I love how you said it. Turns out the rest of the world is like that.
Even my parents will still say, oh, it's so nice we were able to go to, like my parents travel a lot as well. So like they're always talking about like, they go somewhere in the world and they stay with witnesses and, oh, isn't this so wonderful? And, I keep my mouth shut and it's like, yeah,
Right.
It's kind of like that for everyone.
Well, and then these young people wanting to travel. I remember I went to Europe with one of my friends. I was 25 and I remember being terrified of the world. Like you're taught to be terrified of anybody who's not a witness. And I stayed in a hostel and I thought, this is kind of cool. There's somebody from everywhere in this hostel. It was kind of amazing. So yeah, you're taught to be afraid. And here you are saying there's nothing. I mean, there's always going to be scary people, but
yeah, obviously.
not
And
your mind.
that's not to say that people shouldn't be careful, because of course you should be careful. Like be reasonable. If someone's like offering you a place to stay, find out a little bit about them first, that kind of thing.
And
like,
you come out of this organization not having life skills. So sometimes we do end up walking headfirst into a bad or a toxic situation, or maybe even a toxic relationship, because you're not taught how to be very discerning as you grow up. And so what happens is those decisions are made once someone leaves, and then they go back to the religion because they think that that's the world's fault. No, it's just you weren't given the tools to live in the real world.
Yeah. And I think for me, like I did get a lot of those tools through my working in restaurants. Yeah, I definitely learned how to interact with people who, weren't talking about religion 24/7. And it was refreshing, actually. Definitely through work, I learned how to interact in the world. And then when I actually like really went out there to live my life, it was easy because I wasn't having to learn everything all at once.
And you were open to it sounds
and I
like.
knew like the red flags to look out for. After I got back from Europe, I moved to Vancouver. Life in Vancouver, I was just totally open because nobody was going to recognize me. I could just like go do what I wanted when I wanted. Nobody would question me. The only people who would be checking up on me is my parents. And it sounds callous, but like I would ignore them most of the time because I just didn't want to deal with that. And it's not to say that I didn't love them, because of course you can't stop loving your parents when it's almost impossible to have a conversation with your parents without them mentioning something religious. It's just too exhausting to have like a regular, normal relationship.
Right. And they didn't really know that you were out of the religion at this point. So you kind of didn't want to reveal yourself.
After Vancouver, towards the end of my life in Vancouver, I met the person who's now my boyfriend, and we decided to go to Australia for a year. We traveled around Australia together, and then we came back to Canada, and now we're living in a different city, and life is calm here. It's pretty good. I'm happy with where I am in life, and as much as I can't excuse the behaviors of the organization, like I've definitely also become the person I am today because of those experiences. And so like I honestly if I could do it again, I wouldn't necessarily change anything. Let's be clear, like, I don't think the organization should exist. For every story like mine, there's many other stories that are so much worse. And, that's not excusable.
No, but it seems that you have a balanced viewpoint in that. And one of my favorite quotes that I actually just read today, it was, you really can't hate the experiences that you've had because they made you who you are today. And if you can get to the point, if we can get to the point where we genuinely love and appreciate ourselves, which takes work, and everyone is on a different journey in that, that includes the experiences, the good, the bad, the terrible, the amazing. And to hate those experiences would kind of hate different parts of ourselves.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you're at that point of appreciating it. So like,
like
nothing is all good or all bad. Nothing is all good or all bad. It's a Shakespearean quote.
Yeah, I mean, the organization teaches you that everything is black and white, but nothing is black and white, as far as I'm concerned. I kind of feel like, everyone, no matter who they are, whatever decision they're making, they're justifying that decision to themselves in the moment. It's only like with hindsight that we look back and say, oh, that was a good decision, that was a bad decision. But in the moment, it's not good or bad. It's just what that person is justifying to themselves.
And then when you throw indoctrination on top of that, I know that there's a lot of, believe me, I'm an activist, so there is a lot of negativity I have toward the organization because it hurts people, divides families, and they're blood guilty for deaths due to the blood issue, and so on and so on. However, the people in it are, for the most part, good people, just strongly misguided. I'm never going to sign on to the fact that I'm going to speak badly about the organization as a whole, because this is what they want. They want people to leave, talk badly about the organization, and they don't want anyone to live a healthy life because it furthers their narrative. And I remember being that pioneer. I remember, maybe you remember, I remember being that believer thinking, well, they're worldly, I'm not. I'm blessed, they're not. And I'm going to live forever and they're not. And I feel really bad about the version of Wendy who said those things, but I'm able to sit in the pain now with those people who are kind of still inside, still victims of a cult.
And they're suffering and keeping it secret.
Yes. So now that you have found peace and you're living your best life, which is such a cliche, but you're living your best life, what are some things you can say to encourage the younger version of you who is, I can assure you, sitting in that audience right now, to the younger Dan, the female versions of Dan, who are just kind of, what do I do now? I
would just kind of say, don't limit your possibilities, because there's things that you might think are impossible when you're a teenager that are actually attainable. It's possible to get there, but it takes work and it takes effort, but it's worth it ultimately. And my life's not perfect, obviously. Like I want to have a better relationship with my parents, and maybe one day that'll happen, maybe it won't. And that I just kind of have to accept that for now. If you can't prove something is true or not true, then just leave your mind open. If it can be objectively proven, then, take that in and allow it to change your thoughts however it may. But like, if it can't be objectively proven, just leave your mind open. There's nothing wrong with that.
I love that you said objectively proven, because we do approach things with bias. It would be impossible.
Of course, every source has a bias.
Sure does. Even the JWs, they have bias, and they don't accept that they have bias.
If anyone sees this who has my contact information, then yeah, go for it. I don't care.
Okay, and we'll put your contact information in the description box. And if it's okay with you, I'm sure they would love to talk to you. I love that you're not angry, and I love that you are.
Why would I be angry? Like, I'm happy with where I am. So like, if I was angry, then I wouldn't be happy with where I am.
I love it. Dan, it has been such a pleasure to have you on our show. We would like to have you back on at another time, at a later date, to see where you are in your journey. If you would be open to that, we would love to have you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on here, and we'll catch up with you next time.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, bye. Thank you so much for watching the show. If something Danny said resonated with you and you want to reach out to him, all of his contact information is in the description box. If you want to tell your story, You can do so by emailing me, wendyrenee@gmail.com, or click on the Be on the Schedule tab on my website, wendyrenee.com. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.